Chapter 8. From Contract to Ritual. Some authors have stressed the importance of anxiety in masochism, cf. Rick, Nacht. Punishment, in their view, would only figure so prominently because of its function in resolving anxiety and thereby making pleasure possible. But this explanation fails to determine under what particular conditions punishment assumes this anxiety-resolving function, nor especially how anxiety and the guilt it implies are not only resolved but, on a more subtle level, are distorted and parroted to serve the aims of masochism. We must analyze what seems to us the essence of the formal process, namely the transference of the law onto the mother and the identification of the law with the image of the mother. It is only under these conditions that punishment acquires its original function and that guilt is transformed into triumph. At first sight, however, the transference onto the mother would hardly seem to account for the feeling of relief inherent in masochism, for there is no reason to expect greater leniency from the side of the sentimental, icy, and cruel mother. It is already apparent that in his attempt to derive the law from the contract, the masochist aims not to mitigate the law but on the contrary to emphasize its extreme severity. For while the contract implies in principle certain conditions like the free acceptance of the parties, a limited duration and the preservation of inalienable rights, the law that it generates always tends to forget its own origins and annul these restrictive conditions. Thus the contract-law relationship involves in a sense a mystification. To imagine that a contract or quasi-contract is at the origin of society is to invoke conditions which are necessarily invalidated as soon as the law comes into being. For the law, once established, violates the contract in that it can apply to a third party, is valid for an indeterminate period and recognizes no inalienable rights. This process of invalidation of the contract by the law is reflected, as we have seen, in the peculiar progression of masochism. Successive love contracts, the terms of which become increasingly strict, as if to prepare the way for the law that will eventually override them. Since the law results in our enslavement, we should place enslavement first, as the dreadful object of the contract. One could even say, as a general rule, that in masochism the contract is caricatured in order to emphasize its ambiguous destination. The contract may indeed be said to exemplify the very type of a culture-bound relationship that is artificial, Apollonian, and virile, as opposed to the natural, thoughtic relations which bind us to the mother and the woman. In the contractual relation the woman typically figures as an object in the patriarchal system. The contract in masochism reverses the state of affairs by making the woman into the party with whom the contract is entered into. Its paradoxical intention extends even further in that it involves a master-slave relationship, and one furthermore in which the woman is the master and torturer. The contractual basis is thereby implicitly challenged, by excess of zeal, a humorous acceleration of the clauses and a complete reversal of the respective contractual status of man and woman. Hence we have once more a sort of demystification of the contract, inasmuch as it is made deliberately to promote slavery and even death at the service of the woman and the mother. The ultimate paradox is that such a contract should be initiated, and the power conferred, by the victim himself, that is to say the male party. Sada's ironic attitude to the 1789 revolution is that the revolution would remain sterile unless it gave up making laws and set up institutions of perpetual motion. It is paralleled by Masochist's humorous attitude to the revolutions of 1848 and the Panslavic movement. He suggests that contracts should be drawn up with a terrible tsarina, thus ensuring the most sentimental but at the same time the coldest and severest law. In Live Stories, Masoch considers the problems discussed by the Panslavic Congresses and he asks, will the Slavs achieve unity for Russia by getting rid of the Tsarist regime or should they aim for a strong state under the rule of a tsarina of genius? 29. What does the victim expect by entering into this extreme form of contract with the mother? The aim is seemingly naive and straightforward. The masochistic contract excludes the father and displaces onto the mother the task of exercising and applying the paternal law. But we have seen that the mother is both stern and cruel. The problem, however, should be stated differently. The same threat which, when experienced as coming from the father and linked to his image, has the effect of preventing incest, has the reverse effect when entrusted to the mother and associated with her image. It then makes incest possible and ensures its success. Here the transference is very effective. As a general rule, castration acts as a threat preventing incest or a punishment that controls it. It is an obstacle to or a chastisement of incest. But when it is linked with the image of the mother, the castration of the son becomes the very condition of the success of incest. Incest is assimilated by this displacement to a second birth which dispenses with the father's role. Interrupted love is an important feature of masochism to which many authors have drawn attention. Its function is to facilitate the masochist's identification of sexual activity with both incest and second birth, a process which not only saves him from the threat of castration but actually turns castration into the symbolic condition of success. The masochistic contract generates a type of law which leads straight into ritual. The masochist is obsessed. Ritualistic activity is essential to him, since it epitomizes the world of fantasy. Three main types of right occur in masochist novels: hunting rights, agricultural rights, and rights of regeneration and rebirth. They echo the three fundamental elements: the cold, that requires the conquest of the fur, the trophy of the hunt, the buried sentimentality and sheltered fecundity which agriculture demands, together with the strictest organization of work, and finally that very element of strictness, that cruel rigor which regeneration and rebirth demand. The coexistence and interaction of these three rights sum up the mythical complex of masochism. We find it again and again, variously embodied throughout the work of Masoch. The ideal woman hunts the bear or the wolf, she organizes or presides over an agricultural community, she makes man undergo a process of rebirth. The last would appear to be the essential right, in which the other two culminate and from which they derive their function in the totality of the myth. In Wolf and She-Wolf the heroine asks her suitor to let himself be sewn into a wolf's skin and to live and howl and be hunted like a wolf. The ritual hunt is instrumental to rebirth, by taking possession of the trophy of the primitive, uterine mother. The second mother, that is to say the oral mother, acquires the power to bring about a rebirth. This second birth is independent both of the father and of the uterine mother. It is a parthenogenesis. Venus gives a detailed description of an agrarian rite. The negresses led me to a vineyard that lay along the south side of the garden. Maize had been planted between the vines and a few dry heads were still standing. A plow had been left there. The black Kumos tied me to a stake and amused themselves by pricking me with golden hairpins. But this did not last long, for Wanda appeared with her ermine toque, her hands in the pockets of her jacket. She told them to untie me and fasten my hands behind my back. Then she had a yoke laid on my shoulders and I was harnessed to the plow. The black demons pushed me into the field. One drove the plow, the other led me on a leash, and the third goaded me with the whip, while Venus in furs stood by watching the scene. The three negresses stand for the three mother images. We notice, however, that the oral mother is split. She occurs twice, once as an element in the triad, on a par with the other women, and afterward outside the triad, presiding over it, having appropriated and transformed all the functions of the other women in order to serve the theme of rebirth. Everything points to a parthenogenesis, the marriage of the vine and the maize, the Dionysian element and the female agrarian community, the plow, representing union with the mother, the pinpricking and the whipping, representing parthenogenetic stimulation, the new birth of the son drawn out by the rope. Point 30. We have once more the theme of the choice between the three mothers, the oscillating movement of the pendulum, and the final absorption of both the uterine and the edible mothers by the triumphant oral mother. She is mistress of the law, what Mazog calls the law of the commune, in which the hunting, the agrarian and the matriarchal elements become fully integrated. The uterine mother, the hunter, is herself hunted down and despoiled. The edible mother, or mother of the shepherd, already integrated in the patriarchal system, as victim or as accomplice, is likewise sacrificed. The oral mother alone remains triumphant. She is the common essence of agriculture, matriarchy and rebirth. Hence the dream of agrarian communism which recurs throughout the work of Mazog and underlies his Blue Tales of Happiness, Marcella, the Paradise on the Dniester, the Aesthetics of Ugliness. A deep bond is forged between the commune, the law of the commune embodied in the oral mother, and the man of the commune, who can only be born by being reborn of the oral mother. The two principal male figures in Mazog's work are Cain and Christ. Their sign is the same, the sign of Cain prefiguring the sign of the cross which used to be written as X or as plus. That Cain should occupy such an important place in the work of Mazog has a very wide range of significance. He symbolizes in the first place the omnipresence of crime in nature and history, and the immensity of man's sufferings. My punishment is more than I can bear. But beyond this, there is the fact that Cain is a tiller of the ground and the favorite of the mother. He greeted his birth with cries of joy, but did not rejoice at the birth of Abel, the keeper of sheep, who is on the father's side. The mother's favorite went so far as to commit a crime to sever the alliance between the father and the other son. He killed his father's likeness and made Eve into the goddess mother. Hermann Hesse's strange novel, Demian, interweaves Nietzschean and masochistic themes. The mother goddess is identified with Eve, a female giant who bears on her forehead the mark of Cain. Mazog is attracted to Cain not only because of the torments he suffers but also by the very crime that he commits. His crime should not be regarded as a sadomasochistic archetype, for the entire project falls squarely within the world of masochism, with its attendant features of loyalty to the maternal rule, dedication to the oral mother, expulsion of the father, and its elements of humor and provocation. Cain's heritage is a mark. His punishment by the father represents the aggressive, hallucinatory return of the latter. So much for the first episode. The second episode is the story of Christ. The likeness of the father is once more abolished. Why hast thou forsaken me? But here it is the mother who crucifies the son. In the masochistic elaboration of the Marian fantasy, the Virgin in person puts Christ on the cross. This is Mazog's version of the death of God. By putting him on the cross and thus placing him under the same sign as the son of Eve, the Virgin carries on the aim of the mother goddess, the great oral mother. She ensures the parthenogenetic second birth of the son in his resurrection. But again, it is not the son who dies so much as God the Father. That is the likeness of the Father in the Son. The cross represents the maternal image of death, the mirror in which the narcissistic self of Christ, Cain, apprehends his ideal self, Christ resurrected. But we may wonder why there should be so much pain in both cases and why expiation should be the necessary precondition of the second birth. Why should such a terrible punishment be inflicted upon Cain, and why should Christ's torture be so unbearable? Why is Christology an all-pervasive element in the work of Mazog? While Sado was concerned above all with rationalistic and atheistic, Masonic, and anarchistic societies, Mazog gave his attention to the mystical agrarian sects of his day, such as those found in the Austrian Empire. Two of his novels, The Fisher of Souls and The Mother of God, actually deal with these sects. They are among his finest. Their rarefied and stifling atmosphere, their intense portrayal of willingly accepted torture is unparalleled except in the best works of H. H. Yours, who also specialized in sex, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. The story of the Mother of God is as follows. The heroine, Martina, rules over her sect or commune in a manner that combines the qualities of tenderness, severity and coldness. She is wrathful and orders people to be whipped or stoned, yet she is gentle. Indeed the whole sect is gentle and gay, though intolerant of sinfulness and hostile to disorder. Martina has a servant girl, Nymphadora, a graceful, melancholy maiden who gashes her arm so that the Mother of God may bathe in the blood, drink of it and thus gain eternal youth. Sabadell loves Martina, but he loves Nymphadora too, though in a different way. Martina is disturbed by this, and speaking as the Mother of God, she says to Sabadell, "It is the love of the Mother of God that brings redemption and gives new birth to man. I have not succeeded in changing your flesh and transforming your carnal love into divine affection. I have become to you nothing more than a judge." She asks that he consent to be tortured, and orders him to be nailed to the cross. Nymphadora nails down his hands and Martina his feet. Martina then enters into a painful ecstasy, while at nightfall Sabadell enacts the Passion of Christ. 2. Martina he cries, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" And to Nymphadora, "Why hast thou betrayed me?" The Mother of God must crucify her son in order that he should truly become her son and enjoy the privilege of a rebirth from her alone. In the Siren, Zenobia cuts off Theophan's hair and exclaims, "At last I have succeeded in making a man of you." Similarly, in The Divorced Woman, Anna longs to be worthy of her task, to whip Julian and to be able at last to say to him, "You have been through the ordeal, now you are a man." The theme recurs again in a fine short story where Mazog recounts the life of a 17th century messiah, Sabbatai Zwai. Sabbatai Zwai is a Kabbalist and fanatic given to self-mortification. He marries Sarah, but does not consummate the union. He tells her, "You will be by my side," like a gentle torture. On the order of the rabbis he leaves her for Hannah, and repeats his previous behavior with her. He finally marries Miriam, a young Polish Jewess, but she anticipates him and forbids him to touch her. In love with Miriam, he leaves for Constantinople, where he tries to convince the Sultan of his messianic mission. Meanwhile, whole cities are swept with enthusiasm. He has already won over Salonika, Smyrna, Cairo. His fame has even spread as far as Europe. He leads a determined battle against the rabbis, and announces to the Jews the return to Judea. The Sultana is displeased and informs Miriam that she will have Sabbatai put to death if he does not mend his ways. Miriam then orders him to bathe at the confluence of the three rivers, Arda, Tunsha, and Neriso. One cannot help recognizing in the three rivers and in the three wives of Sabbatai the three mother images, and in Miriam the oral mother, who triumphs over them. Miriam makes him confess to her, crowns him with thorns and whips him, and finally consummates the marriage. "Woman, what have you done to me? I have made a man of you." The next day, summoned by the Sultan, he recants and becomes a Muslim. Thereupon, his numerous followers, even among the Turks, declare that the Messiah can only appear in a perfectly virtuous world or else in a totally evil one, and since apostasy is the worst of all crimes, they declare that they will all become apostates to hasten the coming of the Messiah. 31. But what is the significance of this constantly recurring theme? You are not a man, I am making a man of you. What does becoming a man signify? Clearly it does not mean to be like the Father, or to take his place. On the contrary, it consists in obliterating his role and his likeness in order to generate the new man. The tortures are in effect directed at the Father, or at his likeness in the Son. We argued earlier that the masochistic fantasy is less an instance of a child being beaten than of a father being beaten. In many of Masochist tales, it is the master who undergoes the tortures. Thus in Theodora or the Living Bench, in the course of a peasant revolt led by the women of the commune, the master is harnessed to the plough side by side with the ox, or is used as a bench to sit upon. When the torture is inflicted upon the hero, that is to say the son, the lover, or the child, we should conclude that what is beaten, forsworn and sacrificed, what is ritually expiated, is the father's likeness, the genital sexuality inherited from the father, however miniaturized he may be. This is the real apostasy. To become a man is to be reborn from the woman alone, to undergo a second birth. This is why castration, and the interrupted love which represents castration, cease to be an obstacle to or a punishment of incest, and become instead a precondition of its success with the mother, since it is then equated with a second, autonomous, and parthenogenetic rebirth. The masochist practices three forms of disavowal at once. The first magnifies the mother, by attributing to her the phallus instrumental to rebirth. The second excludes the father, since he has no part in this rebirth, and the third relates to sexual pleasure, which is interrupted, deprived of its genitality and transformed into the pleasure of being reborn. The final objective of masochist work expresses itself in the myth that embraces both Cain and Christ. Christ is not the Son of God, but the new man. His likeness to the Father is abolished. He is man on the cross, who knows no sexual love, no property, no fatherland, no cause, no work. 32. We were not able to give material definitions of masochism, since the combinations of pleasure and pain in a specific sensual experience imply certain formal conditions which cannot be ignored without confusing everything, especially sadism and masochism. Nor is a moral definition of masochism in terms of guilt any more adequate. Guilt and expiation, no less than a particular pleasure-pain combination, are genuinely and deeply experienced by the masochist, but here again the important point is to know in what form guilt is experienced. The depth and intensity of a feeling is not affected by the uses which it may be made to serve, including even parody. The nature of the feeling, however, will alter correspondingly. The psychoanalytic statement to the effect that the masochist experiences guilt in relation to the father, in Rake's words, since the punishment comes from the father, the crime must have been committed against the father, clearly leads to the creation of an arbitrary etiology which is solely determined by the tendency to derive masochism from sadism. There is no doubt that the masochist lives in the very depths of guilt, but far from feeling that he has sinned against the father, it is the father's likeness in him that he experiences as a sin which must be atoned for. Hence guilt is turned completely upside down. It is both at its deepest and its most absurd. It is an integral part of the masochist's triumph, and ensures his liberation. Indeed, it is indistinguishable from humor. It is quite inadequate to say, as Rake does, that the punishment resolves the anxiety arising from guilt, and makes possible the forbidden pleasure. The humor which characterizes the masochist's predicament is already at work in the very intensity of his sense of guilt, no less than in the severity of the punishment, for it is the father who is guilty in the son, not the son in relation to the father. Masochism in its material aspects is a phenomenon of the senses, i.e., a certain combination of pain and pleasure. In its moral aspects it is a function of feeling or sentiment. But beyond all sensation or feeling there is a third aspect, a superpersonal element that animates the masochist. This is the story in which he relates the triumph of the oral mother, the abolition of the father's likeness and the consequent birth of the new man. Of course the masochist must use his body and his soul to write this story, but there is nevertheless a formal masochism which pre-exists physical, sensual, or material masochism. Just as there is a dramatic masochism before any moral or sentimental masochism. Hence the theatrical impression which is conveyed at the point where the masochist's feelings are at their deepest and his pain and sensation most intensely experienced. We have traced the progression from the contract to the myth, through the intermediary of the law, for the law transcends the contract but leads us straight into ritual and myth. By means of the contract the paternal function of applying the law was transferred to the mother, resulting in the most radical transformation of the law. The law now ordains what it was once intended to forbid, guilt absolves instead of leading to atonement, and punishment makes permissible what it was intended to chastise. The law has become essentially maternal, leading into those regions of the unconscious where the three images of the mother hold supreme sway. The contract represents a personal act of will on the part of the masochist, but through the contract, and the vicissitudes of the law that issues from it, the masochist is led back into the impersonal realm of fate, which finds expression in the myth and in the rites that we have described. The situation that the masochist establishes by contract, at a specific moment and for a specific period, is already fully contained timelessly and ritually in the symbolic order of masochism. For the masochist, the modern contract is elaborated in the bedroom corresponds to the oldest rites once enacted in the swamps and the steppes. The novels of Masoch reflect this twofold history and bring out the identity between its most modern and its most ancient forms.